Okay, so just to recap on some of the things we've done in the last couple of sessions here. We've talked about the different parts to the soundboard. We've talked about how sound flows from the stage to the board. We've talked about gain structure, and then we talked about the volume control on the last one. Okay, so today it's probably, again, like I said in the last video, probably 90% of what you do by the time the live performance starts is volume control. Okay, what we're going to talk about today, what we're going to introduce today, and this is going to be a several-part series, is the section people don't understand the most, but would like to understand the most, which is the EQ. Okay, the equalizer. So, and see, and that's the next thing you worry about. Okay, so is as you start listening to what's going on, you start adjusting the EQ. Okay, so let me introduce a little bit about the EQ, just as an introduction today, and then I'm going to talk about sound itself, the science of sound, because you got to understand that in order to understand what you're EQing and why you're EQing certain things. Okay, at home there's all kinds of EQs. At home you might have a stereo system, and it actually has an EQ built in. Most stereo systems, even these little boom boxes, will have EQs. They're, you see them as like knobs. You might have two knobs, one called a treble and one called a bass. Okay, and then as you turn the knob, you either get a higher treble or a higher pitch, okay, or higher frequency, okay, and then or you turn it down, then you start hearing the lows a little better or whatever. Okay, so those are EQs. It's just that those knobs are set at a specific frequency, and that's it. You can't adjust different frequencies. Those are preset frequencies. Okay. Other people might go out, and in your car stereo, you'll have treble and bass adjustments too. Okay, and some people will then go and buy what's known as a graphic EQ. Okay, so if you ever seen a graphic EQ, those are the ones with levers on it. Okay, so they look like this. They look like these faders. Okay, where there's levers on it. Have you seen those? Okay, and then and each lever adjusts, either boosts or cuts a certain frequency. Okay, so you'll see like 3-band EQs, 5-band EQs, 10-band EQs, that kind of thing. Okay, and the more bands you see on those graphic EQs, the more expensive usually the EQs are. Okay, so a lot of times at home stereo systems you'll see maybe a 10-band EQ, something like that. In cars, you might see a 5-band EQ. Okay, that sort of thing. Okay, but they do the same thing. Each one of those levers on a graphic EQ is assigned to a specific frequency. Okay, and then there's a center point. Okay, kind of like these faders have the unity. Okay, so there's a point in the middle where if you put the lever right in the middle there, okay, it neither boosts that frequency nor does it cut that frequency. Okay, it doesn't do anything. So if you take a graphic EQ and put it all in the center there, it's as if you turned the EQ off. Okay, turning it on and off will do nothing. Okay, it's only as you adjust up and down on that lever that on that specific frequency, it's either boosting it, adding to that frequency, or cutting it. Okay? Now, on most soundboards, the EQ is known as a parametric EQ. Okay? Now, the nice thing about a parametric EQ is this. You can sweep any frequency you want in the auditory range. Okay? Usually, you can sweep as far down as, like this board here can sweep as far down as 20 hertz and as high as 20 kilohertz. Okay, and I'll explain that in a minute in the next session here. Okay, so on this parametric EQ, I can choose any frequency. I could do 61 hertz on this frequency, or I can choose 14 kilohertz on this frequency, 14 kilohertz frequency. Okay, and I can be that specific, and I can cut and boost on a very specific band on the frequency range. Okay, then you have it's usually divided up in, and depending on your soundboard, you'll either have high mids lows, or high mids, low mids, and then lows. Okay, so those are the different ranges. Okay, that way you have control of 4 different areas. Okay, but in a digital board, any one of you got to understand, any one of these EQ knobs, even though I'm on the low here, so here's the low, here's the mid low, here's the mid high, and here's the high. Now I could take the low, right, and I can go down to 20 hertz. Okay. On a digital board, on this digital board, I can go all the way up to 20 kilohertz, which is in a high frequency. Okay, you just got to understand that you have that freedom in all 4 of the bands here. Okay, but generally you don't do that. Generally you got to keep the lows and the lows. And the lows, most boards, if you have all 4, the lows are usually 20 kilohertz, 20 hertz to maybe about 300 hertz or something like that, 400 hertz, 500 hertz. Okay, and then the low mids, they overlap a little. Okay, so I'm sorry, the lows might go all the way up to about 800 hertz. The low mids might start at about maybe 300 hertz, and it might go all the way up to 1 kilohertz or 2 kilohertz. Okay, so you notice that they overlap. Okay, so on an analog board, you'll have the 4 different ranges, but they'll slightly overlap a little bit. Okay, in each range. Okay, so okay, the third part of this, so you got the frequency, you got the gains. So here, this knob, I can boost it. If I leave it at 0, okay, if I leave the decibel level at 0, okay, then it does nothing. It's like turning it off. Okay, if I add decibel, if I add gain, then I'm boosting at a certain frequency. Okay, if I take away gain, then I'm cutting at that frequency. Okay, then on the top level here, okay, at least on this one, I have peak. Okay, so I have my choice of how I want the curve to look. Okay, so if you guys could take a look at this, as I pick a frequency, so let's just pick 600, and let's do the low mids here. Okay, 630 hertz. Okay, if I add, you'll see the graph is a nice slope, nice curve, bell. Okay, and if I cut, it looks the same, just on the bottom, below the line. Okay, below the 0 line. Okay, all right, that's known as a peak. I can adjust the peak of it. Okay, now the nice thing about this board is this: I can change it from peak to different types of slopes by adjusting this top level here. Okay, so so on the lows, for example, I can do LSV, okay, which is called low shelf. Okay, the low shelf means as I cut and boost the range there, it's a big cut, and it shelves it, so it's one straight line. Okay, same for the high shelf. On the high frequency, there's an HS V, which is high shelf. It does the same thing on a high frequency. Okay, or peak are the 3 standards. Okay, and the peak gives you the nice bell shape. Okay, and then so like for the peak, I like using peak a lot. If I let me fix this back to 0. Okay. So let's say I boost at 630 hertz. Okay? If the peak is low, like 0.3, what is that, 0.36, then it's a really smooth curve. So in other words, it's a nice big bell. That means it's affecting not just 630 hertz, but pretty much all the ranges immediately above and below it. Okay? But if I change this peak to, let's say, the very opposite, 16, then it comes up as a really sharp point, and the only thing I'm adjusting is exactly 630 hertz. Okay? So if I find a frequency, and this is great when, let's say you hear feedback. Let's say you hear feedback, and you got your spectrum analyzer, and this is what happened in when the church was doing a choir there, and we were hearing this low thump. I mean, just really low thump. And every time we kept on, I think they were just rocking on the risers there. And then so I took my spectrum analyzer, and I can hear the thump exactly at a certain frequency. So I went to that frequency on the EQ, selected it, and cut it completely out. Okay, it's just that one frequency, I just cut it out completely, and you didn't hear it again. Okay, so sometimes you can, if you hear feedback, one of the things you could do, if you could find that frequency, you could just cut it out, and then you won't hear the feedback anymore. And that's the beauty of the EQ. Okay, so this video, I just wanted to introduce you to the parts of the EQ. Okay, so you got the frequency selector. Okay, you got the gain where you cut and boost, and then you got the sort of the how you want it to look. Okay, and whether you want it to go a peak, or really sharp, or a nice kind of bell curve. Okay, and so those are the parts. Okay, so now in the next video, what I want to do is talk about which frequency does what, and what is a frequency, what is sound. Okay, and because once you start understanding how the physics of sound, then you start understanding, well, what frequency do I need to cut at? Okay, what frequency can I leave it at? Okay, should I cut? Should I boost? Should I cut or should I boost? Okay, so that would be the next session on here. Okay, but today I just wanted to introduce you just to the parts of the EQ. Okay.